This is Desi the Gray, and this is the Bitcoin Marketing Podcast. Today, we actually have our guest, Frank Corva, who needs no introduction. However, I will give one. But first, I want to thank our sponsors, BitBTC Prague. Please go ahead, use our link, and get to BTC Prague. It's one of the best conferences ever. It's probably one of my favorites. So let's dive in. Our guest, Frank Corva, today is a writer, journalist, and freedom tech advocate who has lived on 5 continents, taught English to immigrants in New York City for over a decade, survived Venezuela's hyperinflation up close, and built a trade school in Ghana. Somewhere in that arc, he discovered Bitcoin and recognized in it the same underground, do-it-yourself energy he'd grown up with in the punk rock and hardcore scene. He became the White House and political correspondent for Bitcoin magazine, helping secure one of the first hard press passes for a Bitcoin media outlet in the White House briefing room. He's also the founder of the podcast New Renaissance Capital, which documents Bitcoin adoption in circular economies and among human rights activists worldwide. And he's an advisor to Heatbit. Recently, he stepped away from Bitcoin magazine to forge a new chapter. He's still writing, still building, still deeply in Bitcoin. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. I remember meeting you, I would say, like in the very, very first few years of my Bitcoin journey and very in between. And it's been really cool to see our journeys kind of, our paths collide here and there. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm going to dive into the first question. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your origin story? You're a punk rocker turned ESL teacher turned Venezuela surviving trade school builder in Ghana, who ended up in the White House press room covering Bitcoin. So
it's been a journey. When you put it like that, it's been a journey. I first, as a caveat, so the punk rock thing, I wasn't into like mohawks and all that. So the aesthetic of it, as much as I was into the mentality, the DIY mentality, so do it yourself mentality. I was really, really inspired by, I don't know how many people would even know these bands, but like Black Flag, Henry Rollins, their philosophy was just get in the van. And what that meant was we don't need to wait for a record label. We don't need to wait for permission. We're just going to get in the van, book our own shows and start playing shows. So when we talk about punk rock, that's what I'm referring to more than loud, noisy guitars and stuff like that. I think I would say more broadly independent music. I love independent hip hop, indie rock, punk rock, all that kind of stuff. But I do genuinely also love melodic punk rock, vocals that kind of sound a little bit pleasing, faster guitars, all that kind of stuff. I'm into that as well. But again, I learned a lot from that world. I got into that world in my freshman year of high school, and it was like people passing around flyers and burning CDs for each other and recording each other's bands. And I was just like, oh, this is super, super cool. And that was actually my frame of reference for the night that someone described what Bitcoin was to me. It was January 2018. I was at a friend's birthday party, and they described this thing that the state doesn't own and that a private corporation doesn't own. And it was just like something in between, kind of like a public utility, if you will. But it made me actually think, and I said this recently on another podcast, I was like, it's kind of like how a genre for music is a protocol. I think about it like that. Bitcoin is kind of like a protocol, the same way a genre for music is a protocol. For folk music, you're going to pick up an acoustic guitar and sing a certain way. For hip hop, vocals are going to sound a certain way. And for Bitcoin, it sort of has a certain set of rules. And when you're engaging with it, those things that engage with it have to abide by those rules. And so I think that that's a decent way to think about it. I've only recently come to this conclusion. But again, when it came to the whole punk rock and early hardcore New York City ethos, and also for people who are unaware, with that style of music, what came out of that in the early 1980s was actually, people hear hardcore and they hear loud guitars, screaming, all that kind of stuff. But what came out of that in the early 80s was actually a huge straight edge movement, which was people who didn't want to drink or do drugs or do things to hurt their bodies because they wanted to be healthier. It was It was to counter the whole live fast, die young narrative in the early punk rock scene. And so it was that. There was also the vegan movement. There was some of the people who were in the hardcore scene became vegans, became monks. And I know in the Bitcoin world, talking about veganism is kind of sacrilegious, but I think it was more the discipline, the fact that they were like, I want to be straight edge and vegan and do all these things that are healthy. And the music, I think you have to look at it more from an energetic standpoint. It was just a deep expression of something they felt inside. And there was a lot of crossover, especially in the 80s in New York City with hip hop, a lot of hardcore and hip hop shows together, which was really exciting. Leading up to the golden age of hip hop in New York, which I think began in like 1985, 86 or so. So yeah, love that whole spirit. Just, and again, with both genres of music, with hip hop, even hip hop, the place where hip hop was born here in New York City in the Bronx, it was laughed at first. You can hear Rick Rubin talk about this. And Rick Rubin, who produced Public Enemy and all the stuff for Def Jam, when he produced all these records, he would go to early hip hop shows and he himself was like, is this for real? I mean, and what does that? I mean, that sounds like Bitcoin to me. That's how most people first looked at it. They laughed at it. Is this for real? Is this a thing? So it's similar. It's like it's taking us some time to wrap our heads around this thing, especially this thing that no company owns, that no state owns, that people volunteer their time to engage in voluntarily, and that is very, very new to the human psyche. So those parallels, I think, were really important for me. I learned those things when I was much younger, not thinking that 15, 20 years later, I would find magic internet money and see some sort of parallel between that and music. But that's how, that was my frame of reference.
Yeah, that's really great. Had not seen that perspective, especially coming from New York. I did not know that. Um, Growing up, I really loved Radiohead, and that was the first time I feel like I saw artists pushing the envelope of taking creative ownership. And that's a big part of that and Grimes and a lot of people in the industry. I'm pretty sure some of these artists that you just mentioned helped pave the way. That's the beauty of art. It is decentralized. It is like a human expression of the artist. Even within filmmaking, you can see the same thing of the evolution of filmmaking. There's a really great docu-series called The History of Film that highly recommend. That in
Yeah,
the
definitely.
same vein.
I think to your point too, for those who might be unaware, Radiohead, it was like in the mid 2000s or something, at the peak of their career or very close to the peak of their career. They just released their music on the internet, peer to peer, very much like, hey, just pay what you want for this record. And I think that kind of stuff really, really inspires me. It's just like that peer to peer stuff, cutting out the middle person so that the doer, the person actually creating the thing, the value accrues to that person. Bitcoin obviously only augments this process. It only makes this even more exciting that people can transact peer to peer as creators, as artists, all this kind of stuff. And I think we're in the early stages of that renaissance, something that, again, started with independent music, independent film, all of this stuff that became easier to disseminate, to distribute with the internet. Now we have money native to the internet that makes it easier for those creators to get paid as well. I think we're on the verge of a super, super exciting time.
Yeah, I highly agree with you. It really is, especially with AI. Everything is, yeah. It actually brings me to my next question. I want to talk a little bit more about like the Bitcoin marketing kind of storytelling problem. So the technology is extraordinary, the people are extraordinary, but the narrative keeps failing to reach people who aren't already, I would say, convinced about Bitcoin. You've spent years telling the human stories behind adoption from where you sit. What does Bitcoin's marketing actually need right now? Like, what's the story that hasn't been told that could change everything?
Yeah, it's a great, great question. I think it's a matter of doing a better job with the human rights side of Bitcoin, telling that story better, and reaching people in ways, in creative ways that we haven't figured out yet. But I think there's another dimension to that. And that's when you create anything, whether it's a story, whether it's art, whether it's whatever. Again, I referenced getting in the van and just touring, just doing it. You have to bring it to people's doorstep. So there's a lot of like people create something, they put it out into the ether, to the universe, and they're like, oh, people will just find this. I'll give you a frame of reference. I think 10 years ago, every 6 months, 100 years worth of music got recorded. That's probably more now. So let's just say every 3 months, 100 years worth of music gets recorded. Every 3 months, more music gets recorded than you will be able to listen to your lifetime if you dedicated yourself to listening to music. So I don't think that it's a storytelling problem per se, though it is, I think, on a certain level, because it's difficult to convince certain people that Bitcoin is something for human rights when all they see is maybe Trump talking about it or Michael Saylor talking about it. No shade towards either of those characters, but that's not the human rights side of the Bitcoin story, which I think is just the most powerful dimension of storytelling in Bitcoin. The thing about that is, I think in Bitcoin, we have gotten a little bit comfortable being with the groups of people who we enjoy being with, which are people who have already gotten Bitcoin. They get it. And that's fine. That circle can sort of expand slowly. That can happen. And we could just allow that to be the case. But what I would recommend to people, especially if you're creating content or trying to tell a story, is to literally walk it up to someone else's doorstep and introduce them to it, and to say to them, like, hey, here's an angle with this. And whatever your entry point is, I don't know how that necessarily will work for everyone. But actually, without being too theoretical, I'll give an example of this. I do hot yoga on Wednesdays and Sundays. You probably weren't expecting that turn. So I wasn't expecting that turn, but this just came to mind.
Love hot yoga.
Yeah, hot yoga is great. Love hot yoga. Highly recommend it. So I do hot yoga on Wednesdays and Thursdays. As I'm there, it keeps sort of sitting there in my mind. I'm looking around and I'm like, man, they're spending all this money in New York City heating this studio. And I know that there's all this stuff happening with heat as a byproduct of Bitcoin mining around the world. People are doing this. Even in New York, there's 2 spas in New York. They're called Bathhouse, and the jacuzzis and everything in the spa, they're all heated by Bitcoin mining. So this is like, and Bathhouse advertises this. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, like, this heat bill must be ridiculous. Energy costs in New York are insane. And so you mentioned earlier, I advise Heatbit, and the CEO of Heatbit was just in New York. And I was like, hey, could you meet me at this place at, Sunday at 5:00? I usually do like a 4:00 class at this yoga studio. And he meets me there and he's like, what are we doing here at a hot yoga studio? And I'm like, hey, let me show you around and blah, blah, blah. And Heatbit recently created these new panels. They call them Canvas, where it's not necessarily just like a Dyson heating device. It's actually something that hangs on the walls. And I'm like, what could we put enough of those in here in this hot yoga studio to basically make this work as the heat for the hot yoga studio, Bitcoin mining? And it's doing it silently, and it's producing the same infrared heat that you would produce, that the regular machines that hot yoga studios produce. And he looked around, he's like, yeah, I think we actually could, and started doing the math. And he ended up meeting with the owners of the studio and this and that. And I share all this because I was really, really nervous to do this. The yoga place is kind of like a sacred place for me. It's where I go to decompress. It's where I go to shut off. And I'm like, man, do I want to bring Bitcoin to this thing? Like, do I need to have Bitcoin in like every crevice of my life? Like, the answer to that is no. But in this case, it seemed to make sense. And so I did sort of cross that line of like, I like this place. They make it a point to keep their the cost of the classes low. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, look, energy costs are only going to go up. I would love for them to keep these classes low, because I know a lot of people come to this studio because it's quite affordable. So, okay, maybe I could help them offset their energy costs by helping them mine Bitcoin while they're doing this. And I was nervous to do that because I was also like, I don't want them to look at me like the Bitcoin weirdo in this studio. I don't bring that side of me up when I'm there and whatever. But I not only brought it up and had that conversation, but they were like, well, what is it and why would I hold it? And one of the things I led with when I described it, I said, look, there are people around the world that hold Bitcoin whose story you've probably never heard. And I started getting into like the Alexei Navalny story and the Alexei Navalny campaign holding Bitcoin, to the circular economy story, to the story of Afribit Kibera, the largest informal settlement or slum in Africa, where there's now a Bitcoin circular economy, saying, well, this might sound a little theoretical to you at first, but you're technically sort of on the side of all this really good stuff if you hold some Bitcoin. On top of that, you're maybe saving for the long term for the studio and this and that. And what was interesting is that she was just like, yeah, and like, look what's happening to the dollar. She got that. She got the problem, the person who I was speaking with. I don't think she had ever thought about Bitcoin as a solution, But I know that a lot of people in New York, especially the type of people that would open a yoga studio, are fairly liberal, right? So they're not, I don't see a lot of like, MAGA hat wearing yoga studios or whatever. Like it's not, that's, those two things don't tend to go together. So I took a guess and said, I would imagine the human rights story might appeal to this person. And so I told it to her, and she was just like, her mind was blown. And she was like, can you please send me, the work you've done on this? I want to read it. I want to listen to your podcast. I want to learn more about it. And it was a really vulnerable position for me to be in for a number of reasons. One, like I said, I didn't want to be the weirdo there, but just generally speaking, I didn't want to be the weirdo in general. With Bitcoin, I've tried to teach people about it for so long. I've gotten so much rejection in that process, not because I try to hit people over the head with it, just because it's money. It's a new form of money. It makes people uncomfortable. It's difficult to describe to people, but the alpha is in having those conversations.
Mhm.
That's the alpha. We need to get past the safety group, the group of people that we normally speak with, who we feel comfortable talking with us about it. And in reality, we also create content for those people. We like to get applause from our peers and stuff like that. But I think that the people who can figure out a way to get outside of that comfort zone, to bring this to other people, and then to spend the time sort of explaining it to them and even potentially educating them about it, which I know is hard. That's really, in my mind, like that's what it is. New communities need to be formed, new people need to be educated, and the message needs to be brought sort of just to a new dimension, to a new group of people. It's not easy to do. It's sort of the challenge, maybe the call to action for your audience, to say like, please try to figure it out. And because I think it's really necessary. We are growing slowly and steadily, the group of people that you and I are friends with and stuff, that's constantly growing outwards. But if we want to do this and we really want to make Bitcoin work, if it grows at the rate that it's growing, amongst the people who are sort of really in the know, in our lifetimes, I don't know how many people are going to sort of understand the benefits of something of Bitcoin. Whereas if we start going to places where it's not traditionally understood, I think we can make a lot more of a difference that way.
Yeah. I love how you took something that you loved and just trying to help it out. And I think there are these levels of getting into Bitcoin. Like you have your years of education, and then you're like, oh, I want to work in this. So kind of trying to figure that out for a few years, figuring out like, how later your interests will merge with this kind of very different world that we're all trying to build.
Yep.
Uh, and then comes the community aspect. And I feel like that's where I'm at also of, wow, I never saw myself thinking about orange pulling merchants in Old San Juan. Like that's not something that came about, but I feel like, wow, this is something I could help with that. And it's really funny because in BitDevs just on Wednesday that it just happened, they all gave us some free miners, and we at that question came up. I'm like, hey, is there a way we can create saunas out of this here in Puerto Rico? And everyone was like, yeah, probably. And here you are already answering the question that you've done it. I think
Not yet.
not yet.
Working on it. Working on it.
Please
Yeah.
keep us posted with that. I'd be very interested to see like the how much they save in electricity, all of that. I think you should just put it out there, make it public, and put the process. Um, you bring up a really good point in that eventually, like your interest or your need to bring out what you know to your community is going to be very important, and everyone kind of figures it out in their own way.
100%. And I think you also just can't hit people over the head with it.
Yeah.
You have to allow them to figure it out in due time, and you don't know what is going to make it click for them. That's a bit of the game. Like I've written a newsletter about Bitcoin for over 5 years now, or just about 5 years now. And the weirdest things will make it click for people. I essentially just write the same thing from a different cross section each week, or just from a different angle, and I will get the weirdest responses of like, oh, I get it now because of this. I'm like, man, I never would have imagined that would have been the thing that made you get it. That was almost like a afterthought that I added to the email or to the newsletter. But I think that's it. Like, okay, if that's what did it for you, great. And for a bunch of people reading it, I still get them. They're like, I still have no idea what you're talking about. I don't look at that as a failing on my part. I look at that as, look, everybody has a different propensity to sit down and try to learn something technologically.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, money is a really sensitive subject. Volatility, Bitcoin's volatility. I know you're not supposed to think about it that way as a hardcore Bitcoiner, but it's as I'm saying this, one thing that comes to mind is there was a woman that I used to work with. I used to be a public school teacher in New York. I taught ESL at a public school in Harlem, and the social worker there was a older African American woman who she signed up for my newsletter because she just wanted to. She's like, "What's Frank up to? Oh, he's doing this. Okay, I'll sign up and I'll learn." I'm thinking like, okay, here's what she probably doesn't get, and she probably doesn't get this and that. And she was just like, yeah, I need some help like buying it. And I was like, okay, you just connect your bank account to this exchange. She's like, I don't have a bank account. Like I don't have a digital version of my bank account. She's still doing everything in person. Like, so it's like you then wake up to like, okay, like I have to be humble enough to actually listen to people here, because the people, like I'm thinking this person must be here. They must understand this person. So I'm asking them to interact with something where you have to hold private keys to it. And if you don't hold them properly, all your money disappears when they've never even interfaced with their digital bank account, and so there's so much that you get very humbled in the process by thinking what people need to hear, thinking what people need to learn. When if you just kind of sit and listen at first, it's easier to meet them where they're at. I'm actually hesitant to say the word easier, because it doesn't mean that meeting them where they're at is going to be easy. It means it'll be easier to find that entry point to see what they sort of need to know based on what they already understand and where they're already at in their journey with money in general or technology, etc. And with a lot of that stuff, like with her, so her brother actually her brother I spoke with her and her brother. I met with both of them, and her brother got it a little bit more quickly. And in that situation, I was like, look, I can't do all of the hand holding here, but like your brother seems to get it now. This is the sort of person that, should help you. And I said to him too, like, it's your sister, like you got to sort of be there, and people need that hand holding.
Yeah.
It's a necessary thing. A really fun fact about her brother. This is super, super insane. I tweeted this once, but I haven't said this to many people. Her brother was Maya Angelou and James Baldwin's bartender. So I orange pilled one of Maya Angelou and James Baldwin's friends, which is really, really insane. For those who don't know who Maya Angelou and James Baldwin are, two of the most famous African American writers of all time in the United States. So he was like 21 years old, bartending at a bar in Harlem, while James Baldwin and Maya Angelou were in their 50s or 60s. He eventually became really good friends with James and would travel back and forth to France and Turkey with him. He still actually has James Baldwin's contact book, like Sidney Poitier and like other people are in this contact book. It's totally, totally nuts. But yeah, I taught him about Bitcoin. It was his sister who I was at the public school with. And oddly enough, I was actually right by her house at the Harlem Bitcoin meetup last night. Didn't see her there, but so yeah, it's keeping an open mind. And it's hard to do though. I even noticed this at the Harlem Bitcoin meetup last night. There was a part of me that was very happy to sit and talk with the Bitcoin skeptic that showed up to it and wanted to be sort of convinced about Bitcoin. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, dude, if you don't like it, don't like it. Like, I don't want to convince you. But at the same time, I don't think he was being antagonistic. He was just like, I don't really get it.
Yeah.
So he wasn't unconvinced because he understood it and then didn't believe in it. He was unconvinced because nobody had ever sat down to talk with him about it. The problem with this kind of stuff is that it can be exhausting. It can be really, really exhausting because it doesn't usually stop with one conversation. There's a follow-up text message, a follow-up phone call, and we all only have so much bandwidth. So I think one of the things, whenever I do teach someone about it now, I'm very clear to them. I say, like, look, I'm going to share some stuff with you. I'm going to give you some homework to do. I'm going to give you some apps to download to practice with this stuff, but I need you to realize that next time somebody asks you about this, when you get it, you don't refer them to me. You become their teacher. You have to take on that responsibility as well. And I'm not saying like, you need to do this, blah, 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 but I'm kind of saying to them, like, I'm passing something along to you now. With that comes a certain responsibility to do that for other people as well, because the other thing that tends to happen with teachers and the people who do put themselves out there is like, oh yeah, that's my buddy Frank. He taught me about it. He'll teach you too. Frank is tired. Frank does this all week. Frank doesn't want to do this on weekends. Like, so it's telling people like, hey, I'm bringing you into, I'm sharing some knowledge that's going to kind of inherently bring you into a broader community. Not necessarily people who revolve their social life around Bitcoin, but just Bitcoin people that hold it. And, it's still a small percentage of the global population. And when with that comes like you're a part of a community. It's not me
Mm-hmm.
as your constant reference. It's that look, it takes a little bit to do this. Financial sovereignty, self-sufficiency, the things that Bitcoin offers people, it comes with responsibility. That's not for everyone. I used to think that I had to make it for everyone. I no longer think that. I think
Yeah.
people have to come to it in their own way, and they have to feel that need to want to be responsible for themselves.
Yeah. I love that. It only stories are contagious. It only takes just putting the information out there, which you're doing. And I love how you're being responsible with the type of information that you're communicating as well, by giving resources and understanding your limits. Like, we can't orange pill everyone, everybody's going to take it. But there is that one person that just needed to hear that story and immediately think of their family, I don't know where they've been sending, cash to, and it all clicks, right? Um, so I applaud you. And it is another way of thinking about it where you don't need to convince everyone and just let them, I would say, also be open, or rather skeptical, and let them go on their own journey. Yeah.
100%. I think it's planting a seed. They might 6 months from now something might click and they might get it and they'll be like, oh yeah, Frank told me about this, and they'll revisit it or whatever. So I think just kind of get in that habit of very gently planting a seed and then giving it some time to grow.
If Frank's tired, are you sure you want to mix yoga with Bitcoin? Right?
Yeah, I mean, I told them because I really like the owners of the studio. I'm happy to be a reference point for them. But I also it was funny. I told Alex, at the guy I work with at Heatbit, the founder. I said, given that this is going to be a bit of an experiment, and I don't want to have a bad name at this place, like we do need to work out a proper price point with them. And if we do want to use this as a case study, we need to make it worth the yoga studios, make it worth their while as well. So I did sort of protect myself in this regard, where I'm like, I don't want to look bad if there is a problem with the check or something like that. It's a thing. And I told them, like, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I also very clearly introduced them to Alex as the technological person, and, said, like, this is the person to sit down with and talk about this if for the tech specs and all that. I think it's a matter of, I think it's things that we all need to learn to do in various ways. And it's on some level giving of ourselves, and then on some level knowing what those boundaries are. That's it. It's all it is. We're human beings. We're symbiotic creatures. We want to work together with other people, but we also don't want to be taken advantage of. So it's just figuring out where that line is for you.
Yeah. Love that. Love that. So let's take it in another direction. And I want to talk about where you've lived before. So you were living in Barquisimeto. How do you
Yeah, you
say
got it. That's it. Barquisimeto. Yeah.
Barquisimeto,
Yeah.
Venezuela? So you're teaching in a Catholic school as hyperinflation began to take hold. Walk us back to that moment. What did inflation look like in real people's daily lives? And how does that experience sit with you when you're covering Bitcoin policy from the White House, or when you were covering it?
Yeah. I appreciate that question for a number of reasons, and I'll get to those in a second. But to bring the audience back to that time, so this is 2010 into 2011 that I'm in Venezuela. Shout out to Barquisimeto. That's where Mauricio from Leiden is from, and also Jorge Gerazati, which means we probably crossed paths. It's not a big city. It's like 1 million people. We probably crossed paths before we knew each other from the Bitcoin space, which is super, super, interesting. But yeah, so inflation at that point, I have to say I probably was there when inflation was getting really bad. Hyperinflation, I think, began maybe a year or two after I left. That being said, I watched while I was there the Bolivar lose insane amounts of value. But the black market rate, I think when I arrived, it was probably like 7 bolivares to the dollar, whereas the average the rate that the government was quoting was 4, and then by the time I left, it was like 11 or 12. So it had lost 50% of its value within the year that I was there, and then from there it just became exponential. How was it affecting people? A lot of people, I would literally bring cash into the country and then change it. I had to do that because Venezuela at that time was already cut off from the SWIFT system. So whatever I would fly home, take a certain amount of cash, put it in my pocket, like basically spread it around my bags and pockets so that I didn't get in trouble at the airport, because whatever money I was earning as a teacher was not going to pay my bills while I lived there. So I needed to just bring cash from the US. And then also I would bring cash. I have family there. My cousin married a Venezuelan woman and she has a bunch of family there. And the barrio that I lived in is the barrio that she's from. So I would also get dollars to people there who needed it. And they were using it, some for spending, some for saving. So a lot more at that time, it was more for saving. People were still spending bolivares, whereas after 2014 or so, I think very few people were using bolivares anymore. They were just using dollars. The economy had basically dollarized at that point. But it was really stressful. People in Venezuela, they don't earn a lot in many parts of the country. And to know that their money was only losing value almost on a day-to-day level was stressful. And at that point, things were bad. They were not as bad as they got under Maduro, who I think came to power. It was either late 2013 or early 2014. And with Chavez, it was also a little bit different. So I have mixed feelings about Chavez. I think in a lot of ways he dignified the Venezuelan people. He was the first non-gringo looking leader that Venezuela had, and I can feel for. I respect that. I think he literally walked the whole country, like went village to village, like trying to win people over. So while I didn't love his politics, I do respect the fact that I think he really did care about people. I think what he thought he was doing was the right way to go about things. And I think that there was a lot accomplished under Chavez, especially in the early part of the Chavez regime, where there were these things called the misiones, which brought in doctors from Cuba and Nicaragua into the barrios for people who couldn't afford medical care. That's good. It's not, again, it's like, it's a socialist thing. I'm not a huge socialism guy, but at the same time, it was helping people. It wasn't just government bureaucracy run amok. It was actually helping people. And then you had, I think he made higher education either free or far more affordable for people who couldn't afford it, which did have a positive effect on Venezuela. Where things changed in Venezuela was 2002, when a kind of CIA-backed coup happened in Venezuela. And so literally the people physically broke Chavez out of jail when they had imprisoned him.
Yeah.
And then I think he just became a demigod, and I think his ego took over a little bit. At the same time, he still did some good stuff for people. But I was there towards the end of Chavez when things were bad, but he was a true believer in what he was doing. They hadn't gotten that bad, and he was actually trying to help people still. Maduro was a whole different level where this was a guy, no offense to bus drivers, but like, he was driving a bus before he took over a country. I respect bus drivers. I use buses all the time in New York. I just don't think you're necessarily qualified to go and like run a country from doing that work. And I think what you ended up seeing was someone who just didn't know what they were doing. And then a lot of people taking advantage of that person, grifting, doing everything they could. And then Venezuela went into what I would say was hyperinflation at that point. But being there, to your question, being there for the beginning of that, seeing the struggle that they were going through, it informed a lot of what I did. And to the question about how did that inform what I was doing in the White House, I appreciate that question, because I think a lot of people, when I took that position, were like, you were the guy writing about Bitcoin in Africa and Latin America. And in my mind, the two were related, because for better or worse, we live in a world where there are a handful of superpowers. I think we're past the point of just the US being a superpower, and we're moving towards a multipolar world. Russia and China are not going to get Bitcoin right. That's not going to happen. So what do we have then? So we have the United States. And what I learned from a lot of, especially Africans, is oftentimes the policy, the legislation, the regulatory frameworks that get crafted in the United States more or less get copied and pasted around the world. So if we got it wrong in the United States, that was going to have ripple effects around the world. So in my mind, the work that I'm doing is saying, okay, well, for better or worse, I don't even love the fact that these things are copied from the United States. I wish each country just came up with what they thought was most appropriate, because it gives more people the ability to influence that policy at their own country level. But this is the way things go. So if that's the case, I have this really unique opportunity where Bitcoin Magazine is getting a White House press pass. They want to give it to me. Okay, maybe I can do something with that. And as a testament to the effect that I think it did have globally, there was a day that I was in the White House press room, and Carolyn Levitt called on me and forget what she asked me, but the question that I asked her was, I'm sorry, she doesn't ask questions, she takes questions. So she gave me some space to ask a question, and I said, "Is the president still considering a de minimis exemption for Bitcoin?" And I thought that that was important for a number of reasons, but the biggest one being that I think one of the things we've more or less gotten wrong in the United States is over financializing Bitcoin. And I don't mind people doing things like borrowing against their Bitcoin, but I don't really love Bitcoin as this like tool for Wall Street. I'm not a huge Sailor fan. I don't hate him or anything like that. It's just like that's not why I came to Bitcoin. He could do whatever he wants with Bitcoin. He's free to do it. But some of what he said about Bitcoin not being money, stuff like that, I think that's problematic. And I've spoken out about that. But it was an opportunity to send a message to say, like, hey, look, the president has referred to Bitcoin as money. Is that still a real thing? And she answered the question, and I appreciated the space she gave me and that she answered as honestly as she could. For the record, also, Carolyn, she would say to me, like, frequently, whenever I would see her, it was just like, you're like, this is not my area of expertise. So she would always do the best. The White House in general, I think, always did the best they could when it came to responding to questions about this, which I appreciated. But I got so many messages from all over Africa and Latin America after that day, like immediately after that clip of me in the press room went viral. And I got messages from people around the world saying our government needs to see this. They need to see somebody in the White House talking about Bitcoin as money. And so it was like, okay, I wasn't wrong. Like I wasn't wrong in assuming like this is going to have a global impact. At the same time, I think the thing I struggled with most was I knew that the work was important on some level. At the other time, I just would always have this feeling in my gut while I was there. I'm like, okay, here I am paying attention to the man who gets the most attention in the whole world, Donald Trump. And that's not me talking whatever about Donald Trump. I think that's just an undisputed fact almost that Donald Trump is one of the people who gets the most attention in the world. And in the back of my mind, the whole time, I'm like, there's all these people doing the real hard work of Bitcoin adoption on the ground. Hard work that involves, like I said, some of that hand holding and education that can be very difficult and emotionally draining. And I loved highlighting their stories because I feel we're human beings and we need to be recognized. And while I was doing the work in the White House, it felt like I'm just paying attention to this person. And it's obviously more than that. I'm not just paying attention to Trump and writing puff pieces about him. I'm writing about what's happening at a policy level in the United States. But I missed it. I just deeply missed covering Bitcoin adoption in these places around the world. In place, I just did a podcast episode on how Bitcoin mining can help rehabilitate Venezuela's power grid. And these are just really beautiful stories that when I stepped away from doing what I was doing before I joined Bitcoin Magazine, there were some people doing it. I know people like yourself sharing it and other people, but there wasn't enough of it, in my opinion. There just wasn't enough of this side of the storytelling. Joe Nakamoto, I think famously he still travels around the world doing this, and he covered this for Cointelegraph years ago. HRF does their own storytelling, and I think that's good too. But I missed it. And in my gut, I was actually at an HRF event, with a bunch of activists and people from around the world. And it was just like this overwhelming tension of like, you can leave this thing and go back to the White House and do that, or you can go back to doing this thing that like is very satisfying to your soul. And it was a tough decision to make because I want to also shout out the work that the likes of David Zell does at BPI, the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and what Susie Ward and Freddie New do at Bitcoin Policy UK. If you talk with David Zell, he just said this on Marty Bent's podcast, and if you talk with Susie, these people do not love interacting with politicians day in, day out. I did not love interacting with politicians day out. Somebody has to do it. Like, that's really what it comes down to. And I say somebody has to do it because I'm not saying like, I'm a big fan of not taking the word should out of your life. Like, you should do this or you have to do this. But if we don't do it, if we don't send people who actually understand this technology and advocate for it, and especially towards the beginning of the White House, quote unquote, sort of adopting or embracing crypto, we needed to be there. The Bitcoiners needed to be there to differentiate between crypto and Bitcoin because that's a huge issue that needs to be clarified for people. And so there was a part of me that was like, I get that this needs to be done. And I get that Bitcoin, the separation of money and state, people that are advocates for that don't understand like, well, why would you go and talk to the state? We'll just create better technology. Well, it's because we live in like a civilized society and a democracy, and like you need to actually get laws passed that help people. And if you think I'm a state simp or something like that for saying stuff like that, the precedent for this was what the cypherpunks did, what the war over PGP, pretty good privacy, in the 1990s was all about.
Yeah.
And the likes of Adam Back will also say, this stuff needs to be fought on the technological side of things, but the legal side of things, of course, is an issue as well, as we're seeing with the Samurai case, with the Tornado Cash case. So in my mind, though it must have felt different to people to see Frank, someone who was normally covering what was happening globally in Bitcoin, move into the White House, I'd like to say that I did that with Bitcoiners around the world, both in my mind and in my heart, trying to advocate for a technology here and regulation here that was going to have an impact globally. Did I succeed in that? Did I message what I just said very well when I was doing it? Probably not. Probably neither. Did I do the best I could? For sure. No question. I put myself into the work and did my best to also make people feel like, I think right before I started at the White House, I was at the Africa Bitcoin conference. And I wanted people to get that sense of like, oh, I was just with Frank in Kenya and now he's the guy in the White House. I wanted people to have that feeling of like, I know Frank, I trust Frank, and I'm glad that we have somebody who cares about this technology and who understands its global impact, representing all Bitcoiners in doing this work. So that was what went through my mind in doing it. And again, it was very much informed by my experience in Venezuela, my experience that you mentioned earlier in Ghana, places where people have historically been disenfranchised financially and in many other ways, and where Bitcoin, I think, in many ways has proven to be a life raft, or at least just some sense of hope that things could get better and provide opportunities for them, unlike almost any other piece of technology ever invented, maybe barring the.
I am very happy you were in that room. I believe the bridging is extremely important, and you might not see if you did do a good job right now in the short term. I am very confident that you're going to see it in the long term for sure.
Appreciate that.
I think it makes you a better storyteller, and it actually is information that you could bring to actually help people, the kind of people that you want to help as well. I'm a firm believer of bridging worlds. I want to do that more myself. And by the way, love Africa Bitcoin Conference. Shout out to them. Please
Yeah,
go to that conference.
absolutely.
It's amazing. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing now. How you already left the White House. I'm curious how that went down, and then going to this like deciding for yourself, like, yes, I need to lean into what I really love to do. Where has it led you? What are you doing right now?
It's a great question. It was weird. I kind of picked up where I left off before I started at Bitcoin Magazine, and I didn't start there as the political correspondent. I was the.
Circles around, right?
Yeah,
Circles
exactly.
around.
So I just had this thing where it's a really silly thing. I once in a while I would stumble back across this YouTube channel. The show is called New Renaissance Capital, and I remembered this feeling of like, I'll even just run the numbers. So like Bitcoin Magazine's YouTube channel has what, 250,000 followers or something like that. And I remember putting out videos through it being like, this is amazing. I'm really grateful that I have this exposure, a team of people to produce videos, and I just have to get on and talk. But there was always this feeling of like, but it's not mine. And I am saying everything I mean here, but I'm not always having on the guests that I really want to talk to. And so there was this feeling of like, I don't really care that maybe only 50 people watch a video versus 60,000 or something like that you would get through Bitcoin Magazine. I just miss putting out into the ether, into the world, stories that I thought were really important to tell. And once in a while, getting a DM from someone or something who would be like, look, this totally reframed the way that I look at Bitcoin. And each of those, one message here and there, or a handful of messages here and there, it always just had this really deep effect on me. I was always just like, oh, okay. Like I found somebody else that was on my wavelength and I brought something to their consciousness that they can now see. And I just loved that feeling. And I was lucky that the way Bitcoin Magazine works is, they use their Twitter handle essentially as like a distribution arm. So when I would write a piece for Bitcoin Magazine, they would retweet it and I would get their 3.9 million followers or however many saw it to see what I was doing. And so it became a really good way for me to put myself on the map as a writer and as somebody, as someone doing media in the Bitcoin space. And I realized that I was coming back to doing what I was doing with the podcast, and that is just one of the things I'm doing now. I was coming back to it thinking in my mind, like, I'll just rewind to 2 years ago and start where I was. But I'm like, no, I'm not where I was. Like, a lot more people in this space know me. Now some of the people that maybe weren't following me for more of the global stuff will get to do that. We'll get to see some of the, or get to learn about some of the global stuff, and maybe that'll be refreshing to them. And so it was sort of like, it wasn't just like I put something on pause. It was just sort of like I put it on hold for a little, well, kind of the same thing, but I kind of put it on hold. But when I came back to it, I have more leverage now. And it makes me excited that I have that leverage, because it gives me leverage to ideally reach more people with these stories. And I'm not a master at marketing or anything else, and there's things I could get much, much better at when it comes to that. I am getting better at outsourcing some of it and hiring people and stuff like that. Not that I make any money, I lose money doing this, but I do it because I care about this side of Bitcoin. Um, so it picked up again doing that to work with New Renaissance Capital. And then it was weird. I wrote a Substack post for the same newsletter I've been writing for 5 years, just about that feeling of conflict at the HRF event, and just being like, I can't live with this tension anymore, and I want to go back to doing this thing that I really want to do. And almost out of nowhere, it seems like a few months after I left Bitcoin Magazine, and I left amicably, by the way. I still love the team at Bitcoin Magazine. I love, the people there. And it was, the day that I left, I was bawling. I was really, really sad to leave. I appreciated the platform they gave me and the faith that they put in me to do the work that I did there. And not only that, but the freedom. Like, once I covered what I needed to cover for them, they always let me write whatever pieces I wanted to write. So if I did want to cover something happening in Africa for them, they gave me the space to do that. Nobody second guessed me. They were happy to have me do it, and I'm grateful for that. But I moved on, and I kept crossing paths with Obi from Fedi, and just kept finding myself at the same dinner table as him and talking with him. And there was this weird thing. So at Bitcoin Magazine, I also became fairly well known for covering the Samurai and Tornado Cash trials. And then I did, not even thinking about it, this just happened in February. A mutual friend of Obi and mine, Jeff Booth, was like, I think you'd be good working with Fedi. And I'm like, whoa, that's the international thing plus the privacy thing. And I'm like, like, that's actually kind of surreal. Plus, I think one of the things Obi does really, really, really well is when he bounces around the world, as he does quite frequently, as he's always on the road. He's making alliances with amazing institutions, really good foundations that are doing humanitarian work, human rights work. And I think that that's really important, because these human rights activists, they need tech like Fedi, privacy tech that allows them to transact privately, to communicate privately. And I think he's doing a really great job. And I think one of the things that he does, he's creating space for those stories to start come to the forefront. And one of the things they hired me to do, which is really interesting, is he's just like, yeah, we just need more of those human stories highlighted. I think most people look at Fedi and they see all of the technology. It's a really cool app. It's a super app, as they refer to it. You can create all these mini apps within Fedi, and it's great. But I think also people tend to find it a little bit overwhelming at first, because it is so capable and you could do so much with it. And I think that tends to put people off. But I think, as you know very well, if you lead with the human story, who's using Fedi, and if people see themselves in other people that are using it as well, then they're going to be a little bit more prone to say, you know what, I will go and spend a half hour with that thing and maybe get to know it a little bit more. Sure, maybe it's not as easy to use right now as something like WhatsApp, but we will get there. It'll become easier to use, and we'll figure that out. But it also does a lot of other things that WhatsApp doesn't do. And so I think there's just a certain level of, like, you can't lead with, same way when you teach Bitcoin, please don't lead with an explanation of a blockchain or proof of work or Austrian economics. I'm going to highly recommend that you don't do any of that stuff. And I say that as someone who did lead with that for a long time. So that's coming from experience. Lead with the human story, lead with a problem that it solves, something that it helps someone do that they couldn't do before. And that might be transacting privately, that might be just transacting in general, might be remittances. You mentioned those earlier. Whatever it is, lead with that, and then allow them to explore and uncover the rest of what the technology offers. And they might not need to understand every dimension of the technology. There's not one person I know, aside from like I say this lovingly, the many autistic people in Bitcoin, and they refer to themselves as that oftenly. So shout out to Shinobi and the other people out there who are, on the spectrum in the best way possible, who do amazing work because of the way that their brain works. But there's not many people who understand how email works, but they use email, and I think Bitcoin is similar. Now, it's a little different in that your email doesn't require you to take responsibility for your private keys. Bitcoin does. So there's gradients to this. But at the same time, you don't need to upfront understand all the ins and outs of how Bitcoin works to understand that it does work. And so I think that that's a big piece of it. And what Fedi brought me on to do is to tap into some of that journalistic experience, to tell stories with it. I'm not a journalist for Fedi. I'm going to clarify that for people. I work in their marketing department, but I'm telling stories, and I'm doing that in a manner similar to the way that I used to do when I was actually working as a journalist. And I think that that's really important. There needs to be some level of communicating, hey, this person is using it for this reason. Someone thinking, oh, I might need to use something like that for this reason too, and getting them to pick it up. And again, to deal with a little bit of the discomfort that comes from not only using a Bitcoin app or something like that, but just using an app that you're not used to using. In the United States, most people are used to using PayPal, Venmo, WhatsApp, whatever it is. These technologies have insane network effects. And so as Bitcoiners, we're not competing against Bitcoin apps are not competing against other Bitcoin apps. Bitcoin and messaging apps, Freedom Tech messaging apps are competing against legacy messaging apps, legacy payment apps, because the average human being, the type of person that most of us want to reach, they're going to say this is too hard, or I don't understand it, or I just want to go back to the thing I feel comfortable with. Do I like that that's the way most people react to it? No. Is that the way most people react to it? Yes. If we don't acknowledge that, again, we're just going to sit there back in our comfort zone with people who already get it, talking about the same things we're talking about over and over, which is great. It feels good, and I love having those conversations. But if we are looking to actually sort of expand the circle here in an exponential way, we need to realize what the competition is, and that's legacy products.
Yeah, I love what you said there. I've been dealing a lot with narrative strategy, especially through a project within the Bitcoin design community. And going back to the kinds of stories, I went through different kinds of mock-ups. And I came to the realizations like, I really want to hear the story of how somebody used that app to save, like, I don't know, their grandfather's business that was passed on to them, and
Yep.
how they did that. And yeah, we have so many technical videos because Bitcoin started that way, right? It
Yep.
was to that audience of, okay, how am I going to explain what this does? But now, like, how is that trickling out to the world without saying Bitcoin, right? Because I think that's, like you said, legacy products. We don't explain what happens when you use Venmo underneath the hood. But it's pretty cool that you can, I don't know why people want to see like a mix with the Facebook and the Venmo. I think that's a little weird as someone who really likes privacy, but people really like that. And it's seamless, right? You can just like interact with your money and your friends at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a community aspect that's gonna, I think, merge. And I really love what Betty's doing, and people like Obi, how they're really helping to spread this. So I'm sure you're going to just rock it and bring this to a whole nother level as a narrative strategist. Yeah. I want to ask you one more question. So you've given up a lot for this. Stable employment, White House access, conventional career paths. You watch cycles come and go. Are you in Bitcoin for life? And what does that actually mean to you personally, not professionally?
Yes, that's the plan. I'll put it that way. And with Fedi, it's interesting. I currently work. Yeah, it's basically a full-time gig. It's not exactly structured that way, but I put a lot of hours in the week into it. So I would say the stress isn't so much giving up full-time employment as much as it is balancing passion project like the podcast that I do, New Renaissance Capital, with Fedi as well, and making sure to give the adequate amount of time to both, and also to also still have a personal life and to decompress from time to time. So that's the bigger challenge right now. As far as Bitcoin and for life, I'll tell one last story. I finished most of my degree to be a clinical social worker. I wanted to be a therapist. That was my goal as of just a few years ago, right up until when I started writing about Bitcoin. And I finished the majority of that degree. It's like I finished, I think, 33 or 36 out of 60 credits, or a little over half of the degree. And once I had already started writing about Bitcoin, I was like, you know what? I think I still really want to be a therapist. Obviously, I'll still be way into Bitcoin and all that stuff, but I think this is just work that I really want to do. And when I went back to one of those classes, I signed up. I had to I think I had been out of the program for like 2 or 3 years. They had to like readmit me and all this stuff. And I went back and I sat in, I think I made it through just two classes in one of the class, in the class I picked up with. And I'm sitting in the class, and the teacher was talking about the way you have to think as a social worker, and it was very much like, we're here to dismantle capitalism, the market economy. People shouldn't have freedoms, and the government should be in control of everything, and this and that. And I'm an independent. I vote Democrat, Republican. I'm not like a hardcore political person, but I don't believe in this idea that the government knows what's best for you. I believe the government can help people. I believe it can provide a social safety net on some level. I'm not a anarcho-capitalist. I'm not like a hardcore libertarian or anything. I'm just a pretty middle of the road political person. I think there's some good ideas on both sides. I've grown to appreciate some of the ideas of libertarianism a bit more, but I'm not quite there. But so I raised my hand in that class and I said something along the lines of like, I understand the frustration and I understand US history and imperialism and all this kind of stuff. I get it. I said, maybe you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's plenty of people who flee places like Russia, China, authoritarian regimes to come to the United States. And that's, again, I understand that United States genocide of African slaves, genocide of Native Americans, slavery, plenty of terrible stuff in US history. And at the same time, the story of immigrants coming here to better their lives, both are true at the same time. And when I brought that up, the teacher was like, looked visibly angry with me, like, how dare you, sort of thing. Like, how dare you sort of like dismantle disrupt my narrative, which is just that this is evil. And I was on the verge of saying, like, I work with people around the world who need something like Bitcoin as a lifeline, and that's a free market money or whatever. And I couldn't do it because I could already feel the hatred, like piling up against me. And I said it in a very mild mannered way. I wasn't trying to be antagonistic. And I realized at that moment, I no longer believed in solutions that didn't include Bitcoin. And that's a very powerful, that's a very bold thing to say. I think I've had this conversation with Susie Ward, who I mentioned earlier. I can't in good conscience, if I were counseling someone as a social worker, I have too much knowledge of the system that's breaking, the fiat system, and what that does to people, to ignore that and to then do my social work in a vacuum. I realized that I couldn't untangle those two things. And when I first signed up for this program, it was at Hunter here in New York City. They very strictly say, like, if you want to be a part of this program, you need to believe in democratic socialism. You cannot be a capitalist. You cannot be this. And I don't think of myself as a capitalist, quote unquote. It's just, I don't use those terms. I believe people should have sound money that doesn't get debased all the time. Sure. Does that make me a capitalist? I don't know. Go for it if that's how you want to define it. But I realized at that moment that I don't know. I can't imagine a time in my life when Bitcoin wouldn't be a part of it. I'll put it that way, because it has been such a catalyst in my own life. It helped me on a financial level get out of student loan debt. It helped me feel more hopeful about the future as someone that tends to work really hard on things. And I was saving in dollars predominantly before I found Bitcoin. Now I save in Bitcoin, and that's been amazing over the last 8 years. So there's this catalytic effect it's had on my life, and I've seen it have a similar effect on people's lives. One of those people being Luthando Nabambi from Bitcoin Akazi. And I had Luthando on my podcast when I first started it, and he talked about how he had given up drinking because he didn't want to waste his money on alcohol, and how he spends more time with his partner and his child because he felt compelled to do that. And this all came in the wake of him finding Bitcoin. And so a lot of his bad habits, they kind of disappeared because now he felt more hopeful about the future. And I know that that catalytic effect, I know people around the world have experienced that. And I couldn't go back into a program in good conscience that would say that that's evil, because it's not evil. I know that it's not evil. And I think that there's still a part of me that wants to be a therapist. And if I go back to it, I'm going to have to figure out a way to do that where Bitcoin is not taboo in that world, where you're allowed to believe in Bitcoin and also mental health. I don't understand how the two would be are not synonymous. In my mind, they are, but to most people who work in the traditional health field and don't understand Bitcoin, I could see how they would think, I'm just totally out of my mind. So while I don't like to say Bitcoin is here forever, I know that I needed, I know that whatever solutions I'm working on in my life right now, that it's a part of it. And that even if I were counseling someone, it would be really difficult for me to not think maybe some of the stress in this person's life is coming from a system that's breaking personally. Maybe they're working hard and their money's being devalued and they're stressed because of that. Maybe it's broader things happening in what I would call the broader fiat system that are affecting them negatively. And I can't take the framework that I now have, what I now understand about the world, what's broken about the world because of broken money. I can't separate the two. So if you ever do see me becoming a therapist, I've miraculously figured out a way to merge the two and to move forward with it. But oddly enough, there's one thing I will say. I recently spoke with Amiti Uttarwar, who started Way, and she does psychosocial coaching for devs. Yeah, and if I do have some headspace, I'd like to actually, I may start working with her. Yeah, we love Amiti. She was just on my podcast. Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. So I think what Bitcoin has taken me on an amazing journey, and it's brought me to people like Amiti, who can show you that counseling someone one-on-one, well, she's a coach. It's a little different than being a licensed clinical social worker, but there is that idea of being there for somebody else and doing that in a situation where that person that you're there for is working on Bitcoin. So it's like almost a complete 180 from what I was experiencing when I was in school. But I think a lot of those unexpected things happen when you get into this space. There's a lot of really beautiful serendipitous coincidences, quote unquote, that happen. And some of it just comes from being open to the fact that, you're going to meet people from all walks of life here. Not everyone in Bitcoin is an anarcho-capitalist, a libertarian, or whatever, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. Like the benefits of Bitcoin will accrue to these people regardless. And I think that over time, if Bitcoin does what it's supposed to do, then yeah, maybe we do live in a world where we just inherently need less government because Bitcoin is solving certain problems that the government is trying to solve right now. I would say failing at solving, but trying to. And maybe we get to that point. But right now we're not there. And psychologically, I know that I believe deep down. I'm going to say this two different ways. This is where I want to be. I'll say that clearly. This is where my heart tells me to be. But I think I can also have a better impact doing what I'm doing now than I could by counseling people one-on-one within a broken system.
That's very well said. In life, there are many paths. I don't think we should stick ourselves in one box. And I think it's such a great thing for this mosaic of all kinds of people working on different problems. That's what's very interesting to me with Bitcoin.
Totally.
And I do see you like retiring and being a coach or something.
Yeah.
For sure. At some point, yeah, you need to do something, put some coursework or something out there to keep planting those seeds. For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm grateful to Amiti. She said it to me after we spoke. She was just like, well, do you want to coach with Way? And I'm like, can I do that? Am I allowed to do that? So right now I don't have the headspace, but eventually
Yeah.
it's something that I aspire to do. One, because I really like her. And
Mhm.
two, I love working with people. I loved teaching. I taught immigrants and I taught in other countries for 12 years in total. And I would always feel energized after teaching. I love people. The hardest thing about working in Bitcoin is having to sit in this seat most of the day and write and do stuff where I'm not moving and not engaging with people.
Yeah.
Luckily, I get to be guests on podcasts like this, so thank you, and host people on my own, which has a bit of there's a therapeutic thing there. The one-on-oneness of it feels good to me. But yeah, as you said, there's a mosaic of people working on really beautiful things, and I think inherently, because the Bitcoin ecosystem, the people in it, the hardcore believers, like you and I and the people we know, it's a small group of people still. So I think we're inherently there for each other. We're inherently coaching and counseling each other to get us through the hard times and to help support one another in the roles that we're playing. So, there's a piece of that there. And I just try to be as present to everybody who I work with and interact with in this space as possible as part of that practice.
Very well said. And remember, please keep being a storyteller first before.
We'll try. Yeah.
So, Frank, where can we find you? What
Yeah.
Put out your information to the public.
Sure. Yeah, I share most of my stuff on X, so just at Frank Corva. Really sad story, very quick. My old Nostr account was hacked, but if you just look up Frank Corva on most Nostr clients, I think my new one will pop up. My old one is labeled old account, so just don't follow me on that one. So yeah, my NSEC was exposed, unfortunately. Still don't know how, which is really weird. But please find me on Nostr. I think Nostr is super cool. Check me out there. I have a Substack, frankcorva.substack.com, and then the podcast is New Renaissance Capital. Across all platforms. I will give a quick shout out to Fountain. Fountain recently started doing streaming video as well. I just really like the team at Fountain, and you could watch it on Fountain, you could watch it on YouTube, and listen across all the major podcast platforms.
Thank you so much, Frank. And I hope to see you around in the world, and hope we do some storytelling together. And great, best of luck on your journey. I think you're exactly where you need to be.
I appreciate that. And thank you so much for having me on. Sincerely appreciated.